Hello, church. My name's Joey, and I'm married to Jonathan, otherwise known as John, and we have two married daughters, Katie and Anna. And it was actually our daughters, Katie and Anna, that found Kerith first. They came about 14 years ago when they were teenagers. So we're very grateful to Kerith for taking them through those teenage years for us. And then we followed them on during lockdown. And before that, we were at Warfield Church. So I've got a question for you. Do you trust God enough to be honest and real with him? Some of you may have listened to the cellar service that we had last week on Poppy Day, and we were talking about suffering and lamenting our losses. And I'm going to share some of the losses that led me to become a Christian. So this is actually a significant day for me. It's 31 years since my lovely mum, Molly, died. I was 4 months pregnant with our first child, and 3 weeks earlier, John's dad had died of a brain tumour, and the day after his dad died, his godfather, Ronnie, died. So you can imagine it was a very dark and painful place that we found ourselves in. I wasn't prepared for my mum's death. Even though she'd had breast cancer first when I was 5, I actually thought she was invincible. I think we think that about mums, don't we? And I was lost. I wasn't a Christian. I'd heard of God, and what I'd heard was that he was a very distant and remote figure and someone that you had to behave very well for. Otherwise, you would feel his wrath. And so I tried very hard to be as good as I could be. I came from a non-Christian family. My dad was a drunk and he wasn't a very nice man at all. Love wasn't a word that we heard in our family. What was modelled to us was the need to be self-sufficient, not to expect anything and not to trust people. My lovely mum had died. I was in pain. I felt lost and alone. In his book, The Problem of Pain, C.S. Lewis writes, "Pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." Well, God had certainly got my attention. It was a brave work colleague that spoke into the darkness and told me about the church she went to and that I might like to go. That was Warfield Church. And that phone call changed my life. So I would encourage any of you who are thinking about inviting people to the Christmas experience. That could be a pivotal point in them meeting Jesus this Christmas. So I decided to go and test out church because and find out what God had got on offer, because I'd got nothing else and I'd got nothing to lose. Fast forward a year and I'd become a Christian. And I actually thought that when I became a Christian, and remember I was young and I was a new mom, so I'm going to blame it on that. I thought that when I became a Christian, I would become instantly perfect. I'd get that zap from heaven. I know, it's naive, isn't it? And it took me a while to realise that God was in the business of transformation, that he wanted to walk with me and work with me, and that my transformation was something that we were going to do together, but only if I let him. And it's my experience that it's been the times of suffering when most transformation has taken place for me. I believe you always have a choice. You can lean in and learn to trust God more in those situations, or you don't have to. I'm sure all of us have been through dark valleys, not just death. It could be the loss of a job, the betrayal of a partner or a friendship, illness, financial difficulties, not getting the job you wanted, not getting the exam results you were expecting. How do you respond in those times? What do we do in those moments? We get to choose. We can carry on as if nothing has happened, deny it, and tell everybody that we're fine. We can keep very busy and throw ourselves into whatever will numb our pain. Or, if we choose, we can turn to God. So I would like to look at how Jesus prayed when he was in an agonizing place. So this passage appears in 3 of the 4 Gospels, and it takes place on the Thursday evening of Easter week. And Jesus had just had what we now know is his Last Supper with the disciples. So what I'm going to read out is an amalgamation of the 3 accounts of that evening. They came to Gethsemane. Jesus told his disciples, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Sit here while I pray." Going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed, "Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Once more he went away, and he prayed more earnestly. His sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Returning for the 3rd time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping? Enough. The hour has come. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Maybe it's me, just me, but I often think, well, Jesus is fully God, so surely it's easy for him. He could get himself out of fixes. But in this passage, and this is why I've chosen this passage, we see, or I see, the humanity of God. I'm really struck by his vulnerability as he shares his pain with his friends. This is Jesus, and he's saying he's crushed to the point of death, that his soul is overwhelmed with sorrow. I know many of us will have been through times when we have felt suffocated by the darkness, and maybe you're in that place now, not knowing what the future holds. So well done for turning this video on and searching out God. Please don't feel alone. This is church. This is family. This is what we do. So reach out and ask somebody to pray for you. Wanting to know what the future holds and understand the reason for it, well, that's being human, isn't it? Jesus did know the reason of what was lying ahead of him, and yet we see him struggling to accept it. In his agony, he went to talk to his Father alone, and he trusts God enough to be really honest with him. He asked God not once or twice, but 3 times for the cup of suffering to be taken away. He does not want to be crucified. We see him wrestling with God. He's alone. And yet he finally accepted and submitted to God's will. How do you think he got to that point of surrender and was able to say, "Not my will, but your will be done"? I think it's because he knew he had a Father that he could trust, a Father that was faithful. And Jesus could submit because he knew a love that would never let him go. We don't always get to know the reason why, and it's hard to accept what we do not understand. But if we are sure of the love of a God that we trust, we can begin to accept things that we don't understand. That same God that loved Jesus loves you just as much as he loved Jesus. That same God that Jesus trusted, we can trust. For those of us who couldn't trust our earthly fathers and who didn't know the security of a father's love, letting God just love us is a lot harder than it sounds. Learning to trust him can be a bit of a struggle. I think we have to keep choosing it. We have to keep practicing trust. And I found with practice, I'm getting better at it. Still not perfect. It is getting easier. I'm getting quicker at submitting to God's will. And in that, I've found that my faith has grown. So, back to my question. Do you trust God enough to be honest with him? This week, do you think you could practice leaning into God a little bit more, especially in the times when you don't understand? Leaning in and trusting him. Leaning in and surrendering to a love that will never let you go. This week, can you let God just love you.